Welcome to the Module 6 of our course, Plus Inclusive Education from Reflection to Action. This module is about inclusive education in practice, pupils with specific learning disabilities. In this presentation, we will address the themes: knowing to understand specific learning disorders, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dysmorphography, and dyscalculia, dyslexia main signs and symptoms, an invisible learning difficulty, truths, myths, and impacts. We will also talk about educational environment, inclusive pedagogy in the classroom, teaching strategies and methods, pedagogical practices, and supportive educational resources. The objectives of this module are: be able to recognize some features of specific language disorders, namely dyslexia, to identify inclusive resources and good practice for students with dyslexia, identify ways of creating an inclusive classroom for children with dyslexia, to adjust pedagogical-didactic practices that promote the potential of all students. With this visual demonstration and testimony from a famous dyslexic, we get closer to the subject and what it is like to have dyslexia. Let's start by getting to know to understand specific learning disabilities. These are neurodevelopmental disorders which cause difficulties in the acquisition of skills such as reading, writing, arithmetic, or logical mathematical reasoning. Why specific? Because they concern the way in which an individual processes information, receives, integrates, retains, and expresses it, taking into account his or her capacities and achievements as a whole. This disorder manifests itself in the areas of speech, reading, writing, mathematics, and/or problem-solving, involving deficits that imply memory, perceptual, motor, language, thinking, and/or metacognitive problems. These difficulties, which do not result from sensory deprivation, mental deficiency, motor problems, attention deficit, emotional or social disorders, although there is the possibility of these occurring concomitantly, can also alter the way in which the individual interacts with the environment. The first signs of this difficulty appear at an early age in the subject's development. These are not attributed to other difficulties, such as hearing impairment. The clinical diagnosis of this disorder has a starting point, not only the analysis of the child's clinical history through psychopedagogical reports, but also by the responses obtained through the interventions, considering, according to the DSM-5, the following criteria. 1. Presentation of continuous difficulties, not only in the use, but also in the acquisition of language in its different domains, for example at the level of speech, writing, or sign language. These difficulties derive from a set of deficits in comprehension and production, namely: A. Use of reduced vocabulary. B. Limitation in sentence construction, which is reflected in the ability to join words and word endings. C. Difficulty at speech level, which is reflected in the ability to develop a conversation, explain, or describe something. The linguistic capacities of the subjects are not developed in accordance with their age, revealing functional limitations in terms of communication. This reality has repercussions at social, academic, and professional levels. Children with specific learning disabilities present a wide variety of characteristics and problems which may appear separately or together. The existence of specific learning disorders does not exclude others. This is what we call comorbidity. It is important when assessing dyslexia to consider the possibility of other associated disorders which may affect language, behavior, communication or learning, and have an impact on school performance. The 10 most commonly reported comorbidities are: 1. Hyperactivity. 2. Perceptual motor problems. 3. Emotional instability. Sudden emotional outbursts without obvious cause. 4. General coordination deficits, clumsiness and poor motor coordination. 5. Attention disorders. 6. Impulsivity. 7. Memory and thinking disorders. 8. Specific learning disabilities, reading, writing, spelling, and arithmetic. 9. Hearing and speech disorders. 10. Diffuse neurological signs such as electroencephalographic irregularities. Let us now focus on dyslexia. The definition of dyslexia is likely to evolve further in the years to come as knowledge and research on the subject improves. For now, one of the most accepted definitions is: dyslexia is a specific learning disability of neurobiological and genetic origin, characterized by difficulty in identifying written words at reading level and limitation in writing and decoding. This includes students with normal intellectual ability who have no sensory problems, such as hearing impairment. There are a number of signs that may indicate a diagnosis of dyslexia. These signs may be conclusive if there is evidence from them for a period of at least 6 months of at least one of the following difficulties: limited or no word reading accuracy, conditioned reading speed and fluency. This includes slow and strained reading, difficulty in understanding what is read, difficulties in writing, namely poor or no spelling accuracy, limited or no accuracy in grammar and punctuation, barely legible handwriting, difficulty in organizing ideas and writing clearly. It should be noted that 1. The school skills affected also have implications for everyday tasks. The signs mentioned above start quite early in the student's school career. However, in some cases, such difficulties may only become evident in adulthood. Now let's talk about the main behavioral manifestations of dyslexia. Slowness in completing school tasks, homework for example. Lack of ease in performing reading tasks or avoidance of reading tasks. Presentation of short periods of concentration time due to stimuli from the outside. School results below the intellectual capacity of the pupil. Difficulties in learning new languages. Manifestation of blockades in front of the exhibition, reading for example. Evidence of isolation behaviors in school and classroom settings. Better results in oral exams than written ones. Emotional manifestations of dyslexia. Anxiety when facing assessments or reading and writing situations. Presence of feelings of frustration, shame, sadness, and inferiority. Evidence of low self-esteem. Sleep disturbance. Dyslexia is the most common learning disability to occur in a school context. All children with dyslexia have language difficulties, varying in severity from child to child. Some have difficulty with reading and no difficulty with arithmetic or memory problems. Others have more fluent reading and a lot of difficulty with spelling. In most cases, there are only evident signs when the child starts learning to read and write. It is not until the end of year 2, although more commonly in year 3, that a diagnosis can be made through testing. A formal diagnosis can therefore only be made after 2 years of schooling. However, if there is any indication that dyslexia may be present, the child should be monitored even without diagnosis to prevent the difficulties from worsening. What happens is that, in school, it probably won't be possible to do this monitoring, because in order to benefit from a specialized intervention in school, you must have a formal diagnosis. There are schools that already have projects aimed at pupils with indicators of possible future difficulties in reading and writing. How is the diagnosis confirmed? Through an assessment of reading and writing skills, in which fluency, expression, accuracy, comprehension, and language development are assessed. An evaluation of your cognitive profile, intelligence quotient, IQ, verbal and achievement skills, a language assessment, phonological awareness, ability to rapidly name visual stimuli, understanding of instructions, and verbal memory. Medical examinations, screening for visual or hearing problems. Associated with dyslexia, there may be 3 other learning disorders. Dysorthography. This is a difficulty in spelling, more precisely in the acquisition of learning to write, where the most obvious characteristic is the presence of spelling mistakes. Dysgraphia. This is a letter drawing difficulty, resulting from motor difficulties, that is, changes in fine motor skills and speed of movement. Dyscalculia. It is the difficulty manifest in the development of mathematical reasoning and calculation. This learning disorder affects many famous people in science and the arts have lived with dyslexia. Leonardo da Vinci, Italian painter, Vincent van Gogh, Dutch painter, Albert Einstein, German physicist and academic, Steven Spielberg, American filmmaker, among many others. We are going to watch a short video where very familiar faces give us their testimony and explain what dyslexia is.
If you're dyslexic, it's kind of your superpower. It's like the way that you think.
Our brains, they're wired to, I think, process information differently.
It's just the way that you see the world.
I don't think people do think the way I think.
And we're curious, we're creative.
The way I see the world might be different from somebody else, but that's valid. In fact, it's vital.
The imagination, the storytelling, the communication, the empathy, all these positives.
We can simplify things. We see the big picture.
In a world which is pretty competitive, I think to be able to look at it differently is a huge advantage.
Dyslexic minds have exactly the skills we need for the workforce of tomorrow.
My spelling makes people laugh. It makes me laugh, actually. And my reading, if I'm sight reading, it's a complete joke.
School was pretty difficult, to be honest. I wasn't a massive fan of the classroom.
I used to always hide in the store cupboard, but fortunately my English teacher knew that that was my spot.
It was hard for me to focus and concentrate in class.
I hated reading, I hated writing, like spelling in public, reading out loud.
Dyslexia can cause real challenges in traditional education. Memorising lots of facts and figures, it can be difficult.
We're not teaching kids to think, we're teaching kids to pass exams.
If education is a challenge for a child with dyslexia, you need to understand how to educate them so that it isn't a challenge.
1 in 5 children suffer from dyslexia. That's 20% of the classroom. And yet, teachers aren't trained to recognise it.
I think it's vital that teachers are trained about dyslexics. Because the world is changing and imagination is key to everything. And there's going to be a lot of kids whose potential are lost unless we train our teachers to effectively teach them.
Imagine a world where you've got, where you've got like a force of people who have this gift of dyslexia educated in a way that supports them. It means anything's possible, It means anything is possible.
We want to give you an insight into other current perspectives of dyslexia by referring to recent research. It is important to note that this article is not intended to debate the existing evidence regarding dyslexia or to understand why such individuals experience difficulties with writing technology. Rather, the aim is to reinterpret the existing evidence from the perspective of cognitive research. The study suggests hypotheses as to why these cognitive differences underlying dyslexia may have evolved. Cambridge researchers claim that dyslexia should not be redefined as a strength rather than a disability. These concluded that this neurological condition is linked to enhanced abilities in areas such as discovery, invention, and creativity. These skills are vital in helping humans adapt to changing environments, the researchers say. New studies like this suggest that dyslexia is, in fact, a vital tool that has helped mankind to adapt. When this new perspective of cognitive research is combined with other lines of evidence, it is possible to see that the cognitive attributes identified in people with dyslexia have a strong evolutionary imperative. The study we left in the comments of this video proposes a new framework to help us better understand the cognitive strengths of people with dyslexia. One of the vulnerabilities of this neurodevelopmental disorder is that dyslexia is an almost invisible difficulty for most people. It is important to remember that the child with dyslexia is well aware of his difficulties and knows that he is not like other children. If she doesn't have the necessary support at home, she tries to hide what causes her low self-esteem and fear that others will find out, and that she might be rejected or excluded by her peers. Some children with dyslexia even manage to hide their difficulties so that others do not notice. These children are often good orators, giving the impression that they have understood what is being discussed, even though they are not able to put their ideas in writing. Often, This type of behavior associated with low self-esteem can be strong indicators of this difficulty. How can teachers measure this low self-esteem? There are some signs that make it evident. For example, lack of willingness to start studying or doing homework, anxiety to do homework, avoid looking others in the eye, tendency to avoid others and isolate themselves, excessive prudence when checking their work, isolation from their peers and seeking the company of younger or older children, tendency to make scenes to attract attention. Despite not being able to answer some questions, they would rather take more time than ask for help. They are children with little persistence and with low self-confidence. These children react positively when they are given responsibilities to which they can respond. Given these characteristics, at home it is important to check if the child has understood well what has been explained, first orally and then repeating it until you are sure that he has understood well. Don't consider it a waste of time to check the child's tasks and don't hesitate to question him as often as necessary to see if he has understood correctly or what has been asked of him. Parents should ask the teacher to be attentive and encourage the child to interact in a positive and constructive way. Children with dyslexia are very creative, and this will add value to the group. In school, it is important that the child's participation in group work is encouraged. It is necessary to be very attentive so that it can result in a positive experience and to verify that the child is not sidelined. Be careful to request tasks that are in line with their abilities and interests, in accordance with their skills. Tasks should be proposed which the child can complete successfully and, if necessary, break them down into sequences with accessible intermediate objectives. Peer tutoring can also be a useful aid. It may be suggested that a good student support the child with dyslexia in some of the subjects where he feels the need. It is not doing it for them, but guiding them in a particular task so that they can do it themselves. The teacher should take care to propose a task that the child can complete successfully. This is crucial for the child's motivation. There are two important factors for motivation, which are success and knowing that you can perform a certain task. According to several studies, dyslexia affects between 5% and 10% of the school population worldwide. A higher prevalence of dyslexia has been observed in males. Researchers talk the importance of heredity for the early detection of dyslexia, hence the high incidence of dyslexics among siblings, parents, and other relatives of dyslexic children. Dyslexia has no clear cause. The study of dyslexia involves a large number of disciplines: genetics, neuropsychology, psychology, and psychopathology. Today, there is no doubt that dyslexia in most cases has a strong genetic basis, but it is not a monogenic disorder, that is, linked to the mutation of a single gene. The neurological origin of dyslexia can be confirmed with magnetic resonance imaging and neuroimaging. Since dyslexia is a neurological problem, children with dyslexia cannot be cured, but need constant, close support and encouragement. There is a misconception about the help provided to the child since the classes, the speech therapy sessions, the re-education only intervene at the psychological level. Society still propagates this idea in the form of judgment. The idea that it is something treatable and that it is often just laziness and an excuse for not achieving are the main myths associated with dyslexia. Children with dyslexia learn differently. When they are asked to learn in a way that does not work well for them, it takes longer. Give them time and, above all, motivate them at all times, however few positive results there may be. Another very common myth is the idea that people with dyslexia are not intelligent. On the contrary, many are bright and creative. In fact, many children with dyslexia are considered to be gifted from an early age. There is still a misconception that people with dyslexia cannot learn to read or write. With the right intervention and instruction, people with dyslexia can become excellent readers and writers. Some people even think that people with dyslexia see things the wrong way round. As we have seen, it is not a vision problem, but the way the brain makes sense of what it is seeing. How can the educational environment be more inclusive for these students? Students with dyslexia require adaptations to facilitate learning acquisition. It is essential that teachers are awake to the real needs and challenges faced by these students. Therefore, it is up to the teaching profession to provide a range of inclusive, pedagogical measures such as: in the way they communicate with students, be clear and open about your needs and expectations. Do not give double-meaning messages or use irony. Whenever possible, make available technological support resources such as spell checkers, calculators, and text readers. Promote a quiet working environment without major distractions. In order to facilitate learning, allow lessons of greater content or complexity to be recorded. Visual aids such as mind maps, diagrams, and visual organizers are also facilitators of the learning process. Situations where a student with dyslexia needs to read a text aloud. Close or one-to-one work makes the challenge more comfortable for the learner and more effective from the point of view of the teaching-learning process. Use multisensory teaching methods. These methods draw on the use of movement, touch, along with what we see and hear to help the student acquire skills in the area of writing and reading. If possible, create a space for self-regulation in the classroom itself. As well as knowing that such a place exists, it is essential to create self-regulatory time where not only dyslexic children benefit, but also the dyslexic ones themselves. Finally, exposing information through videos and other digital resources makes the educational environment much more engaging and accessible for students with dyslexia. In addition to the educational environment, it is essential to promote inclusive pedagogy. In addition to the general good practice already covered in previous modules, we now talk about specific practice for learners with dyslexia. These are considered basic or elementary practices. To provide different ways of working in the classroom context, in large and small groups, in pairs, or individually. Maintain verbal interactions with students throughout the lessons in order to understand whether or not the student is understanding what is being taught. Clarify all the doubts raised by the student. Monitoring throughout the tests. Make summaries of the contents taught in order to facilitate the student's study. Allow the recording of the material given during the lessons. To allow the student to use other ways of presenting the contents, drawings, pictures, videos, etc. instead of written work. Examples of out-of-class activities which provide for the development of learning-related skills such as writing, reading, and comprehension. Concentration exercises, memory stimulation, activities related to reading, and writing activities. As we mentioned earlier, the use of sensory methods is a good practice. Multisensory methods are methods that combine sight, hearing, and touch to help the child to read and spell words correctly. The child starts by observing the written grapheme, then writes it in the air with a finger, listening and articulating its pronunciation. They can then cut it out, mold it in plasticine or clay, with their eyes closed, recognize it by touch. Carrying out these activities therefore favors the creation of visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and articulatory images which, as a whole, affect the globalization or unity of the reading and writing process. In order to facilitate the reading process, it is important to use strategies that enhance decoding. Decoding is the ability to break down words read into sound units, the phonemes, and find the correspondence between the letters, the graphemes. The same word may be decoded, learned, repeated, reviewed multiple times in different ways until it is automatically recognized. When a child decodes a new word, it will immediately develop the ability to save its image in its memory, in its mental lexicon or internal lexicon. This way, you will be able to recognize it automatically every time you see or read it, no longer needing to go through decoding. We can speak of an internal dictionary built up little by little in their memory. Without this rapid recognition of words, children will continue to decode each word of the text they are reading, which will certainly take them much longer than resorting to the internal lexicon. It is necessary to teach children to develop the automatic recognition of words and to know how to decode them correctly. For this, you need to have a good grasp of the sound elements of language, their combinations, and their letter representations. It is essential that they learn strategies to build their mental lexicon and thus access fluent reading in order to know what they are reading, in other words, to have good comprehension. It is important to apply strategies that enhance phonological awareness. This consists of the ability to become aware that the words read are made up of phonetic units, phonemes, and syllables, and to distinguish between them. The child should be taught how to distinguish the different sounds of the language, how to add or omit them, that is, how to manipulate them. It should be explained whenever possible in a playful way that oral language is made up of sentences, words, syllables. See practical examples in our manual plus Inclusive Education from Reflection to Practice. Having strategies for teaching metacognition is also essential. Metacognition is the knowledge of one's own cognitive products, that is, the knowledge that the subject has about his or her knowledge. It is necessary to propose strategies throughout this process for students to reflect, question what they are doing, and evaluate the content of the text. The use of portfolios, thinking aloud to formulate hypotheses on the topic in question, practicing reading guided by the teacher, and providing various recordings or appointments with questionnaires to consolidate each topic are some strategies for working on metacognition. The aim of these strategies is to equip students with dyslexia with all the resources they need to control the activity of textual analysis and so make knowledge accessible. In several countries, including Portugal, a dyslexic student can benefit from special assessment conditions at school, provided they are diagnosed and their individual educational program is drawn up accordingly. When we have students with dyslexia, it is good assessment practice. Greater use of oral evidence over written evidence. Conducting assessment evidence that avoids multiple choice questions, direct questions, only present the essentials in the test, deprecation of spelling errors and strokes outside the margins. Do not value poor writing, inadequate syntax, abbreviated expressions. Valuing the contents expressed rather than whether or not they are correctly written. Paused reading of statements, not only of assessment tests, but also of other tasks developed in the classroom context. Allow more time for testing. Grant more assessment moments in a non-concentrated way and in different modes. In summary, we can summarize some good practices desirable in all disciplines. These are: at the beginning of the lesson, recall the most important subject from the previous lesson. The instructions in the statements should be explicit. Check that the child has already mastered the knowledge of a certain subject before moving on to the next. Prepare the situation so as to practice each step a lot and all the steps together. Reinforce knowledge with the use of visual codes, diagrams, underlining, schemes, colors, among others. At the end of the lesson, review the topics covered and include them in homework. There are also a number of specific practices for improving semantics, for example, closed method, matchmaking, to improve syntax, to improve articulation, to improve phonological awareness, for reading and comprehension, metacognition teaching practices, specific to each discipline, as well as practices to work on the motivation of the student. Family strategies and practices. You will find all these practices developed in the handbook plus Inclusive Education from Reflection to Practice in Chapter 6.5 of the 6th module of the handbook. In addition to all these practices that contribute to a truly inclusive pedagogy, it is essential to invest in specific training, whether we are parents, teachers, or other educational professionals. It is up to us all, as educators, to know the best strategies to support the education of all children in particular, and those with learning difficulties in particular. We are sharing a testimony that summarizes everything we consider essential, which we will now read. I am a special education teacher. I am also dyslexic and my whole family is dyslexic. My 2 sons are dyslexic too. I did my course. When my children came along, I decided to do 2 postgraduate courses, one in communication and language and the other in cognitive and motor skills. Dyslexia is included in the first. I never let my children be labeled because at that time they were labeled. A dyslexic child is an extremely bright child, hence the facility that these children have in other areas. I don't agree with medication. These children need a lot of love, a lot of patience, a lot of dedication, and above all, they need to be encouraged to have a high level of self-esteem, to value everything they do well. Dyslexia is no longer covered by special education, so I would advise parents of dyslexic children to look for a special education teacher, but one who is reliable and works particularly hard. The most important thing is that the children feel that although they have some difficulty, they are also capable of making progress and being good at what they do. In order to promote information and empowerment of the whole educational community, we have produced an information leaflet that can be used as a resource for children and their families to learn about dyslexia. This leaflet is available as an annex to the manual and can also be downloaded from the official project website. There are a number of educational resources which are tools to support learning and which can make a difference to the academic progress of a child or young person with dyslexia. From speech recognition programs to independent reading pens and other literacy aids to games and more playful tools, you will find in Chapter 6.6 of the handbook, plus Inclusive Education, From Reflection to Practice, suggestions of some educational resources that are good references for use both at school and at home. Not all countries approve the use of reading pens in assessment tests. It is up to teachers and parents to know the law and fight for the rights associated with the specific learning disability. Finally, there is a teacher survival manual with aspects we consider key when working with students with dyslexia. As there is evidence of dyslexia only when the child starts to read, it can take 2 to 3 years before a diagnosis is made. Be patient and get to know the student's difficulties as well as possible with the family. Attention needs to be paid to 2 indicators for the early diagnosis of dyslexia. 1. The child's personal history, to know if there are any cases in the family, if there were delays in locomotion or problems in lateral dominance, right, left, in spatial orientation, up, down, front, rear. 2. Delays in language development, a factor increasingly evident as the first warning sign. As class teacher or class director, you should seek reliable information about this particular learning disability. You should be aware of the 37 warning signs of dyslexia, see Appendix 3 of Module 6 in the handbook, and should seek specific knowledge and training to adapt learning strategies accordingly. Remember that you can ask the inclusive education or special education teacher for help. You can produce a leaflet or use the one we gave you earlier and make it available at school. You can also request training support from specialized associations. As a head teacher or class director, it is important to talk to the family to find out if the behavior and difficulties observed are also felt at home, to flag the child for assessment by the school psychologist, and to implement the learning and inclusion support measures defined. It is also important to remember that it is essential to work the class towards inclusion. Introduce a video and age-appropriate activities to raise awareness. For example, students should be aware of the limitations and potential of their classmate with dyslexia. It is also important for students to know what behaviors to avoid and what behaviors to promote. Behavior by the teacher, teaching assistants, and classmates can cause the student with dyslexia to lose control. This is a reminder of what should not happen. Call the student by the diminutive of his name. He or she should be treated as the rest of the students. The diminutive name shows pity and coitism and paves the way for a capacitating discourse. Asking the student to read aloud and/or other activities that expose them and make them feel threatened in their skills. not reading the statements and/or more demanding tasks slowly, not using alternative ways and resources to read. Do things for the student or get someone else to do them. The student's autonomy should be maximized, and he should not let his colleagues do everything for him because they consider him incapable. Transmit to the class that if we don't teach them to do, if we don't let them try, they will never succeed. The survival guide is not a recipe. All students with dyslexia are different. We must never try to change the student. The school must mold itself to them. We should always believe that they are capable because they are. However, they can only show this if we give them the chance to do it by a different pedagogical route. And so we end this module. This module is intended as an introductory course to the specific learning disability, dyslexia. We recommend that the acquisition of knowledge is not exhausted here or in the handbook plus inclusive education. Use the suggested references and additional resources to deepen your knowledge. We end with 2 suggestions for reflection. 1. What new information have you learned about dyslexia? 2. What changes to your teaching practice do you envisage making after this module? We hope that this module has been interesting for you and has given you not only hints, but concrete tools to work on inclusion in your school. We suggest that you consult the manual for a more in-depth study. We propose some additional resources that complement what we have already mentioned here. As well as taking notes on the key learnings you take away from this video, we welcome your feedback on the link provided in the summary of this video.